Barrett Maddox hadn't expected to see smoke curling from the chimney of his long-forgotten ranch. 6 weeks earlier, he'd bought the property sight unseen from a seller desperate for fast cash. After a brief inspection, urgent business had called him east, leaving the place locked and lifeless. The deed was solid, the papers in order. No one should have been there. Yet as he rode up the winding trail that crisp October morning, the scent of freshly baked bread drifted on the wind, mingled with the sound of women's laughter spilling from behind weathered wooden walls. 4 horses stood in a corral he never built, their coats brushed to a shine. Neat garden rows stretched where only weeds had once grown. Someone had not only moved in, they'd made a life here. His boots thudded on the porch steps, and instantly the laughter inside died. Barrett pushed open the door he knew should have been locked and stepped into a scene that shattered every assumption he had. The main room glowed with firelight, filled with sturdy handmade furniture that hadn't been there before. Dried herbs dangled from the rafters, and the patched quilts on the walls turned the bleak space into something startlingly alive. 4 women stood frozen near the kitchen, faces tight with both fear and resolve. The eldest stepped forward first, a woman with silver-threaded hair and sharp gray eyes. Her name, though Barrett didn't yet know it, was Grace Shaw. Behind her stood Cora Lane, golden-haired and green-eyed, defiance flickering in her gaze. Ruby Callahan, with copper curls and beauty too striking for a trespasser, and Violet McCall, whose graceful posture hinted at better days long past. None apologized. None looked ashamed. They simply watched him, like women accustomed to danger wearing human faces. Barrett felt the deed crinkle in his jacket pocket as he searched for words. Grace spoke first, her tone calm and unflinching. "You must be the new owner." He nodded, eyes moving from one woman to the next. They weren't vagrants or thieves. Their clothes were modest but clean, their manner dignified. They looked as though they belonged here. But what caught his attention most was their positioning. 4 bodies subtly shielding a doorway that led to the back rooms. Something, or someone, was being protected. Barrett took a measured step forward. Instantly they shifted as one, forming a practiced wall between him and the door. Weeks of preparation were written in their synchronized movements. "I need to see the rest of my property," Barrett said evenly, anger simmering beneath his composure. He'd paid dearly for this land, yet here he was, treated as the intruder. Cora moved forward, the firelight flickering across her face. "We can explain," she began, her voice wavering despite her brave front. "But perhaps we should sit first." "I don't want explanations," Barrett cut in. "I want to know what's behind that door." Ruby's hands clenched at her sides, and for a fleeting moment, Barrett saw the faint outline of old bruises on her wrists, before she quickly tugged her sleeves down. Violet McCall rested a protective hand on Ruby's shoulder, and Barrett noticed the paradox in her fingers. Elegant, yet bearing the roughness of work she was clearly unaccustomed to, but had been forced into. Grace Shaw's gray eyes never wavered from Barrett as she spoke. "We're not hiding anything dangerous, Mr. Maddox. We know who you are. We knew this day would come." The admission sent a chill through him. "You knew I owned this place?" he asked, incredulous. "Word travels fast in small communities," Grace replied, though her tone hinted at layers she wasn't revealing. "We know you bought it from Harold Wickham. We also know you've been back east on business since the purchase." Barrett's jaw tightened. They had been watching him, studying his routines, preparing for his return. The knowledge ignited a flare of anger that momentarily eclipsed his curiosity. "I don't care who you are or why you're here," he said, voice rising. "This is my land, you're trespassing. 1 hour, pack your things and leave." A sound from the back room froze him. Soft, almost fragile, yet unmistakably, a baby crying. His anger shifted to something heavier as he studied the women's faces. Cora's defiance faltered. Ruby's eyes glistened with tears she wouldn't shed. Violet instinctively stepped closer to the door they guarded. Grace's calm finally cracked, revealing the fear beneath her composed exterior.
"Now you understand," Grace whispered, "why we cannot simply leave." Barrett stared at the closed door, realizing a baby changed everything. These women weren't mere squatters. They were protecting something far more precious than their own comfort.
The thought of forcing a child into the cold wilderness of October twisted his stomach, even as his legal rights tugged at his reasoning. Yet as he looked at them again, he sensed there was more hidden beyond that door. Pushing past their defensive line, Barrett opened the door to a small bedroom converted into a nursery. Ruby stood by a makeshift crib, cradling an infant no older than 6 months. The baby's dark curls contrasted strikingly against Ruby's copper hair. "This is Emma," Ruby said softly, voice thick with emotion. "She's my daughter." Barrett studied Ruby's face, searching for resemblance, finding little. The child's mixed features explained why Ruby had fled to an abandoned ranch rather than risk the scrutiny of town gossip and judgment. Cora moved closer to Ruby, her stance protective. Barrett pieced together the story. Ruby's husband had rejected her, unwilling to accept a child who didn't resemble him. The revelation landed like a physical blow. He had heard of such cruelty before, but never confronted it so directly. In the rigid structure of frontier society, women like Ruby faced impossible choices when betrayal came from within their own homes. "He threw us out 3 months ago," Ruby whispered. "Told the town I was unfaithful. Claimed Emma wasn't his, though she was born 8 months after our wedding. No one would give me work or shelter. They believed him because it was easier than facing the truth about the man he really was." Violet stepped forward, her elegance now revealing a story of survival. "I found Ruby and Emma sleeping in the church doorway. The pastor said she couldn't stay. The congregation was gossiping." Barrett felt a shift in his chest watching these women rally around Ruby and her child. Their loyalty was absolute, born of shared hardship and mutual protection. They had built a family from the ruins of their shattered lives. Grace's voice pulled him from his thoughts. "We've been here 6 weeks, Mr. Maddox. In that time, we've repaired the roof, cleared the well, planted a vegetable garden, and made this place livable." "We're not asking for charity," Grace said, voice calm but firm. "We're asking for a chance to earn our keep." Barrett looked around the room, truly seeing it for the first time. The walls were scrubbed clean, the floorboards repaired and polished. Shelves along one wall held jars of preserves and dried goods, a testament to weeks of careful planning and hard labor. These women hadn't just taken over his property, they had restored it. "What about the rest of you?" Barrett asked, though he suspected the answer would further complicate his situation. Cora's green eyes met his directly, and his pulse quickened in a familiar rhythm. "We all have our reasons for being here, Mr. Maddox, and we all have nowhere else to go." Barrett stepped back into the main room, his mind reeling. These women hadn't merely intruded, they had transformed his land into something far more valuable. Legally, he owed them nothing for their work, yet morally the picture was more tangled. "How did you even know this place was empty?" he asked, finally lowering himself into one of the handmade chairs. Violet McCall smoothed her worn skirt, sitting with a quiet elegance that spoke of upbringing and training. "I used to live in the main house on Wickham's property. I was his daughter-in-law until my husband died in a riding accident last spring." Barrett's eyes widened. He had bought the land from Harold Wickham 6 weeks prior, departing immediately for business back east. Wickham had no way of knowing these women had moved in after the sale. "Harold blamed me for Thomas's death," Violet continued, voice steady, despite the pain flickering across her features. He said, "If I hadn't been so absorbed in reading books instead of learning proper ranch skills, I would have noticed the saddle leather cracking." He gave me 3 days to pack up and leave. That was 5 months ago. I've been surviving ever since. Barrett felt a tight knot form in his chest. Wickham had been desperate to sell this remote property, offering a price too good to resist. Now Barrett realized Wickham had merely wanted to rid himself of any reminders of his son, never imagining the woman he had cast out would take refuge here. Grace Shaw moved to the kitchen, preparing coffee with practiced efficiency. "I was the school teacher in Wickhamstown," she explained, "until the new preacher decided a woman over 40 shouldn't teach children. He convinced the council that younger married women would offer better moral guidance." "So you lost your position because of your age?" Barrett asked. "No," Grace corrected, a steel edge entering her voice. I lost it because I refused to promote the preacher's son to the next grade when he couldn't read simple sentences. They used my age as an excuse, but it was really about protecting their own. Barrett felt the weight of their stories press around him. Each woman had been displaced by men wielding power over their lives. Yet none had surrendered. They had banded together and built something new from the wreckage of the past. Cora, standing by the fireplace, her golden hair catching the light, addressed him. "You're wondering about my story," she said. Barrett realized he had unconsciously betrayed his curiosity. "I'm wondering how 4 women from different lives ended up working together so seamlessly," he admitted. "We found each other because we had to," Cora replied. "And we made this place work because the alternative was letting Ruby's baby starve or freeze before winter." The sound of approaching horses interrupted them. The women exchanged glances that spoke of practiced emergency routines. Grace moved to the window and peered out, then turned back, her expression ice cold. "It's Harold Wickham," she said quietly. "And he's brought the sheriff. Someone must have told him we were here." Barrett moved to the window. Wickham dismounted deliberately, preparing for confrontation. The sheriff, a heavy-set man from town, remained mounted, hand resting on his holstered weapon. 3 others accompanied them, their faces hard with righteous anger that left little room for reason. Ruby had vanished into the back room with Emma, while Violet stationed herself near the rear entrance, calculating escape routes. Grace stood behind Barrett, her presence calm despite the tension radiating from her frame. Cora remained perfectly still, her green eyes locked on Wickham with an intensity that made Barrett shiver. A heavy knock on the door reverberated through the room like a gunshot. Barrett glanced over his shoulder at the women behind him, then opened the door before Wickham could pound again. "Wickham," Barrett said evenly. "I wasn't expecting visitors." Harold Wickham, a man used to being obeyed, stepped past without invitation. His weathered face, lined with years of authority, swept across the transformed ranch interior with clear displeasure. "Maddox, I came as soon as I heard," Wickham said, his tone carrying the command of someone unaccustomed to being questioned. "My foreman saw smoke from this property yesterday and spotted these women. I knew immediately what had happened." Barrett kept his voice calm despite rising anger at the intrusion. "And what exactly do you think has happened?" "That woman," Wickham pointed directly at Violet, "is a manipulative creature who destroyed my son's life and caused his death. She's convinced these others to help her steal what she believes she deserves from my family." Violet's composure cracked for the first time since Barrett had met her. "Thomas died because you gave him a horse you knew was too wild. Harold, you wanted him to prove himself, and it cost him his life." The sheriff stepped forward, filling the doorway. "Ma'am, Mr. Wickham says you're trespassing, squatting on property that isn't yours." Barrett felt the weight of the moment like a noose. Legally, the women were trespassing. Morally, the situation was far more tangled. They had nowhere else to go, and they had improved the land significantly. "Sheriff Thompson," Barrett said carefully, "these women are my guests." The lie slipped out before he could stop it, but the relief on the women's faces confirmed it was the right choice. "Your guests, Maddox?" Wickham's eyes narrowed dangerously. "You've been gone for weeks. How could they be your guests?" Barrett felt Cora's hand brush against his arm. A brief, almost accidental touch, yet it lent him courage. "I hired them to maintain the property while I was away. They've done excellent work." As Wickham's face darkened with rage, Barrett realized he had made an enemy of one of the most powerful men in the territory. Wickham stepped closer, voice dropping to a threatening whisper that carried clearly in the silent room. "You're making a serious mistake, Maddox. I know every business deal in this territory. Harboring criminals will cost you dearly." "These women aren't criminals," Barrett said, though his heart raced with the implications of defending them. Sheriff Thompson shifted, hand on his weapon, though now uncertainty shadowed his expression. "Mr. Maddox, if these ladies are working for you, I'll need to see an employment agreement." Panic rose in Barrett's chest. He had no such documents. The arrangement he'd just claimed didn't exist. Before he could respond, Cora stepped forward with surprising confidence. "Mr. Wickham," she said, voice steady, "I'm surprised you don't recognize me, though I suppose it's been nearly 2 years since you last saw me at your ranch." Wickham's face went pale. Recognition flickered in his eyes, swiftly followed by fear. "Ca Langley," he breathed. "I thought you were dead." "I'm very much alive," Cora replied, green eyes locked on his. "Though not thanks to your efforts." Barrett felt the atmosphere shift. The history between Cora and Wickham was clearly complex, dangerous even. The sheriff's posture straightened as he focused more intently. "Langley?" Sheriff Thompson asked. "Are you related to Judge Langley of the Territorial Court?" "He was my father," Cora said simply, though Barrett noted the past tense. Wickham's confidence began to crack. "Cora, whatever you think you know about your father, you're mistaken. His death was an accident." "My father didn't die by accident, Harold," Cora said, her voice growing harder. "He was murdered because he uncovered your land fraud and refused to be bribed. And I have proof." The room fell silent, the weight of her words deafening. Barrett felt as if he'd stepped into the middle of a war he didn't understand, yet one that would consume everyone present. Wickham's eyes darted between Cora and the sheriff, calculating, desperate. Sheriff Thompson's hand moved from his weapon to a pair of handcuffs. "Miss Langley, those are serious accusations. What proof do you have?" Cora reached into her dress pocket and withdrew a small worn leather journal. "My father's notes on Harold Wickham's illegal acquisition of territorial lands, including forged documents and bribed officials. Everything needed to put him in prison for life." Barrett watched Wickham's face morph from anger to pure hatred as he realized his past had finally caught up with him. Wickham lunged for the journal, but Sheriff Thompson moved between them with surprising speed. His hand now rested on the handcuffs, and his stance shifted from enforcing a property dispute to investigating a crime. "Mr. Wickham, step back," Thompson said firmly. "Miss Langley, I'd like to examine that journal." Cora handed the leather-bound book to the sheriff, green eyes never leaving Wickham. Barrett leaned in as Thompson opened the journal. Page 43 detailed forged signatures on territorial land grants, evidence enough to topple Wickham's empire. Page 67 revealed the officials Wickham had bribed to overlook the irregularities in his land claims. Barrett watched as Wickham's expression flickered through panic, disbelief, and fury while Sheriff Thompson turned the journal's pages carefully. The room held its breath until one of Wickham's companions, a thin man with anxious eyes, finally spoke. "Harold, you told us these women were criminals," he said, backing toward the door. "Nothing about Judge Langley or land fraud. I want no part of this." The other two men exchanged uneasy glances and silently followed him out, leaving Wickham alone, his authority collapsing. Barrett felt a mixture of admiration and awe as he watched Cora maintain her composure, confronting the man responsible for her father's death with quiet strength. Sheriff Thompson looked up from the journal, his face grim. "Miss Langley, these are detailed records of criminal activity spanning years. If accurate, Mr. Wickham has defrauded the territorial government and countless citizens out of thousands of acres." "They're true," Cora said softly. "My father refused to participate in Harold's schemes and threatened to expose him. He died because of it. Harold made it look like an accident, but my father was an expert horseman. He wouldn't have tried to cross Devil's Creek during a storm unless he was being pursued." Wickham's composure shattered. "You can't prove any of that, Cora. His death was ruled accidental. No one will believe a bitter daughter's words." "Perhaps not," she replied steadily, "but they will believe documented evidence, land grants, witness accounts my father compiled. 3 men he named have already admitted to accepting bribes in other cases." Barrett felt the weight of revelation settle over the room. Cora had not been hiding. She had been methodically gathering evidence to bring her father's killer to justice. The remote ranch had provided the perfect refuge to complete her plan. Sheriff Thompson closed the journal and looked Wickham in the eye. "Harold Wickham, you're under arrest for land fraud, bribery of territorial officials, and suspicion of murder. You have the right to remain silent." Wickham made a final desperate protest. "This is ridiculous. You've known me for 20 years. Are you really arresting me based on the word of these women?" "I'm arresting you on documented evidence that I am legally required to investigate," Thompson replied, securing the handcuffs. "A territorial judge will determine the validity of these charges." Barrett watched through the window as Wickham was led away, handcuffed, followed by the 3 men who had abandoned him. The sound of hooves faded, leaving an almost unnatural quiet over the ranch. Cora sank into a handmade chair, tension leaving her shoulders now that her father's killer was in custody. Barrett studied her, marveling at how she had carried such a burden alone while protecting the other women who had taken refuge here. "What happens now?" Grace asked, her practical tone cutting through the aftermath. Barrett felt the weight of 4 lives resting on his answer. Legally, he could still make them leave. Morally, he could not. Ruby appeared from the back room holding Emma, who had slept through the confrontation. The baby's peaceful face contrasted sharply with the tension that had filled the house moments before. Barrett watched as Ruby settled by the fireplace, protective and careful. "You're welcome to stay," Barrett said, words flowing spontaneously, yet inevitably. "All of you, this place is better with you here than it ever was empty." Violet's composure finally broke, tears of relief streaming down her face. Grace nodded quietly, satisfied that her plans had aligned with fate. Cora looked at Barrett, green eyes warm. "Are you certain? We can't pay rent and no one can vouch for our character." Barrett moved closer. "You've already paid your rent by turning this place into a home. As for character references, what I witnessed today says everything I need to know about who you are." The late afternoon sunlight streamed through windows Violet had polished, illuminating the quilts Grace had mended and the herbs Ruby had dried. Barrett realized they had not merely occupied his land, they had transformed it into something he had never imagined. "One condition," Barrett added, watching Cora's expression. "I'd like to court you properly if you're willing." Cora's smile said enough, but she spoke anyway. "I'd like that very much, Barrett Maddox." 6 months later, Barrett stood in the same room where he had first encountered 4 desperate women. The house now buzzed with life, Emma laughing as Grace helped her walk, Ruby humming while preparing dinner, Violet reading aloud from a book. Barrett had married Cora in a simple ceremony officiated by the new territorial judge, who had sentenced Harold Wickham to 20 years for land fraud and conspiracy. The ranch had become a home for an unconventional family, not bound by blood, but by shared courage and understanding. Barrett had bought an abandoned ranch as an investment. Instead, he found something far more valuable than land or money. He found purpose, transforming 4 broken lives into something beautiful and whole. If you enjoyed this story, click the video on your screen now to watch another unforgettable tale where destiny and courage collide. Don't forget to subscribe and consider a super chat to support more stories like these. Your support makes everything possible.